Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. The US has seized an oil tanker with links to Russia and Venezuela as Pete Hegseth says the blockade of sanctioned and illicit Venezuelan oil remains in full effect anywhere in the world. The White House says President Trump has discussed a range of options to acquire Greenland, including possible military action, but the US House Speaker says he's not heard anyone talking about this. And Iran's president has ordered security forces not to crack down on economic protest, distinguishing peaceful demonstrators from armed rioters. Now, the US says it seized an oil tanker with links to Venezuela and Russia in the North Atlantic. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has said the blockade of sanctioned and illicit Venezuelan oil remains in full effect anywhere in the world. A second tanker has also been seized in the Caribbean. For more on this, I'm joined by Republican strategist Adolfo Franco. Adolfo, as always, great to have you on the show. The US has... Pleasure. The US has confirmed the seizure of 2 oil tankers linked to Venezuela. Moscow has slammed America's use of force against the Russian flag tanker in the North Atlantic. And just as we were coming on air, Moscow is also demanding a swift return of the seized tanker's Russian crew, which is on board. So we see Moscow hitting back very hard against this action by the US. Do you think we're heading for a confrontation between Putin and Trump?
I don't. First, we talk about sanctions. Our European friends particularly are so insistent on severe and enforceable sanctions against Russia. Well, this is it. We've been talking about sanctioning Russia in terms of oil and other necessities, and I endorse that, but we have to have the enforcement, and we just saw the enforcement action. So I don't think President Putin can afford, in the middle of a costly war with Ukraine, to deploy naval or other assets to the Atlantic when he has to worry about the Black Sea and his southern flank with Ukraine. So that's number one. Number two, the United States has put the world on notice. There is a blockade for some time now, and these sanctions are being enforced. It's that simple. Those tankers will be returned to Russia empty.
And it's really interesting because we also heard that the UK was involved in the seizure of one of these oil tankers, RAF planes. Right. And what you just said to me is the fact that Europe wanted sanctions. This is what they asked for. So is Donald Trump delivering for NATO and Europe then, in your opinion, Adolfo?
I do. And we have to keep in mind, Leigh-Ann, beyond even this blockade of Venezuela, we had put enormous pressure on countries like India, as you know, and even China to some extent, but certainly India, that have continued to not sanction Russia and continue to purchase Russian commodities and export commodities to Russia. So that's why we saw our chief partner, UK, participate in this. This is a strong signal to Putin, who only understands strong signals, that it isn't just talk in Brussels and in other capitals of the world about sanctions, but it's action, and the president is delivering it. One of the key things we've talked in this program before that I think the world understands is President Trump's unpredictability, and I mean that in a good way. And he has said it himself, I might or I might not. So it's plain Russian roulette, no pun intended, for the Russians or anyone else to cross President Trump. When such a red line has been drawn in the Caribbean regarding this blockade, he is not Joe Biden, he is not Barack Obama, who drew red lines in Syria and other places in the world to have them crossed. President Trump will continue to enforce these sanctions, and no one will stand up to the United States despite the rhetoric.
And it's really interesting because I think Donald Trump has made that clear. He's not a procrastinator. He pretty much does what he says. But Adolfo, President Trump is enjoying the sugar rush after America's successful capture of Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. There's a lot of uncertainty across the globe, and many people are asking lots of questions. And one of those questions is, who is going to be next in the target of Donald Trump? Is it going to be Greenland? Is it going to be Cuba? Is it going to be Colombia?
Well, there are a couple of things to keep in mind, and some other time we'll talk more in depth about Greenland if you wish. Greenland, of course, is Denmark, an extension of Denmark by and large. It's not an adversary. Venezuela is an adversary. Greenland is something we want a different arrangement with Greenland, and we will get it eventually. I don't think militarily. But with respect to Latin America, it's a signal to those countries, which, of course, number one on the list was Venezuela and Cuba, that are working with our adversaries, our enemies, and frankly, terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah. The United States is going to, he said, not have this type of activity in our neighborhood, the Western Hemisphere, the so-called Monroe Doctrine, a play on the Monroe Doctrine of the United States that had a right to interfere in the Western Hemisphere. So there will be selective targets. Among the targets, Leigh-Ann, remain the cartels and the drug issue. That is still a legitimate issue beyond other issues in Venezuela, and those will affect Mexico and Colombia. And you will see significant U.S. pressure, not in military intervention, but significant pressure to possibly even target militarily the cartels, but not the governments in those countries.
Yes, it's really interesting because Donald Trump has reiterated Colombia is run by a sick man. He won't be doing it for very long. And he said that time and time again. So we will be watching what happens in Colombia. But Adolfo...
May I add Colombia something quickly about Colombia? I know both countries, Venezuela and Colombia, very well. There are elections in May in Colombia. That's just around the corner. The likely candidate leading in all the polls is a man by the name of Juan Carlos Pinzon, very pro-American, has been all the previous presidents before Petro, the current president. So I think the situation in Colombia will resolve itself. And I also believe, just so you know, running Venezuela, since I'm often asked that, and I know PDVSA, the oil company, well, I worked with it, means what we're seeing in the blockade. 90% of its revenue from Venezuela comes from oil. We have a blockade. The money is not going to flow to the U.S. if it leaves at all. The petrol leaves Venezuela. So we will control it financially or the country will collapse.
And I hope we can have a conversation about that at some time because, as we know, Venezuela has the biggest proven oil reserves, but a lot of it's been untapped. So it's going to be those U.S. oil industries that are going to have to invest billions in order to extract that oil from Venezuela. And those are the questions that many people are asking right now, Adolfo. Okay, it's all good and well that the U.S. says we will control the money, we will help Venezuela, but the infrastructure under Maduro has been completely destroyed. Hospitals don't run properly. There's no electricity. There's no water. Is that what the US is going to do? If they thought about the day after and they're going to be like, we'll be involved in the reconstruction?
Well, the reconstruction can be done with the resources that Venezuela currently has. They've just been stolen by the elites in the country. I know the country well, and I know the oil industry well, and I worked with the petroleum companies in Venezuela. It's heavy crude. And ironically, the place it's refined to make it light and available for gasoline and other products is Houston. And that has been the relationship that we had with Venezuela through PDVSA, the name of the company, the state company, through many U.S. companies, Chevron being the leading one. So we have the infrastructure in the U.S. to make use, and at Venezuela advantage, to make use of this heavy crude, which comes out of Venezuela. It's not light crude like we have in the Arabian Peninsula. So the money that flows from that, which is significant, can be rechanneled for the reconstruction. President Trump has said that money is now going to flow for the U.S. to control, but he also said in his statement to not only help the U.S. because we have deployed a lot of assets that are quite expensive in the region, but to go back to the Venezuelan people. So Venezuela has the resources that they're managed by other than corrupt Venezuelan officials to address the needs of its society. It just hasn't done that in the past. In the last 27 years, it's been run by really a crime syndicate, and that's what we're dismantling.
And I'm sure the Venezuelan people will be watching what you have to say and really hoping that that is the outcome. But I just want to end the conversation with, on Truth Social earlier, Trump said, we will always be there for NATO, even if they won't be there for us. What do you make of this attack on US allies? And do you agree with Donald Trump, the fact that the other NATO countries aren't there for America as much as they should be?
Well, the fact of the matter is, anybody who has worked in Brussels and has worked with NATO understands, even though we're now pushing NATO countries under President Trump successfully to make their pledged contributions, which many of them have never made, and some of them are not making now, that the U.S. is really, at the end of the day, the linchpin and really the force that can protect Europe. I don't believe that most of the countries in Europe, even collectively, can confront challenges, as evidenced by Ukraine, where they've turned to the United States. So that's what the president means. We will be there, and they won't be there for us. Leigh-Ann, here's the difference between Donald Trump and other politicians and statesmen who I've worked for in the past. He doesn't speak in the kind of language diplomats and public consumption wants to hear. He's speaking the truth, and he's speaking what's said behind closed doors. The difference is the American people are hearing it for the first time. Those are facts. The U.S., and anyone will tell you this, is critical for NATO's survival and to defend NATO. NATO can't defend the United States. We can defend NATO. What I mean by NATO is Europe. And that's just a reality. And that's what he means by that statement.
Adolfo, Franco, Donald Trump definitely doesn't mince his words, but thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Leigh-Ann.
Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Latin American expert Colin Harding. Colin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. So I just had my guest on there, and we were discussing, first of all, I don't know if you can comment on the US seizure of 2 further oil tankers with links to Venezuela and how Russia has reacted.
Well, this is, as Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, said, this is showing that the blockade on Venezuelan oil is being enforced anywhere in the world. One ship was apprehended in the North Atlantic and the other one in the Caribbean. So this is a reinforcement of the message that the U.S. controls Venezuelan oil, and that's the only country that is now in control of Venezuelan oil. And this message has been reinforced by President Trump's statement today that Venezuela is going to deliver between 30 and 50 million barrels of good quality oil to the United States. In other words, they're the only country that's going to benefit from Venezuelan oil is the United States, and this is what the Venezuelan government, under President or interim President Delcy Rodriguez, is expected to come up with and to obey American instructions.
Let's get into that a little bit more, because President Trump says Venezuela, as you said, will give up to 50 million barrels of oil to the US, which is worth somewhere in the region of $2.8 billion. What do you make of this prediction by Donald Trump, and how many years could it take to turn over that volume of money?
Well, as far as the oil is concerned, I mean, this is heavy oil from the Orinoco belt, which produces most of Venezuela's oil these days, and that has been stored in the port of Jose on the Caribbean coast, which is the tanks there are said to be absolutely full to overflowing. So this is oil presumably belonging to PDVSA, the Venezuelan state oil company, and that is now, it's there, it's ready, and that can be shipped. As far as increasing Venezuela's output of oil, that is a much bigger task and a much bigger unknown. Executives of the big American oil companies that used to be in Venezuela but left after the nationalizations in the early years of this century, that's ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips, they are said to be meeting the president or his representatives sometime this week to discuss going back to Venezuela. The president has said that the oil companies are eager to get into Venezuela and are they ready to go, and they will be increasing oil output from Venezuela for the benefit of the people of Venezuela as well as the American people. But of course, this is a very, very big undertaking. As has been said, the infrastructure of the oil industry in Venezuela has been very, very run down indeed in recent years. A lot of experienced personnel have left, even from PDVSA. And the investment needed to get the industry producing again, even anything like the 3 million barrels a day that they used to produce until about 10, 15 years ago, it's going to take many billions of dollars. I've seen a figure of $110 billion and probably take a decade.
And under Maduro, Venezuela's economy is completely crippled, along with the country's infrastructure. There are water, energy, and food shortages. Things in Venezuela are just not good. Do you think that the US having control of Venezuelan oil and the profits will really help people who are living in poverty in Venezuela benefit?
Well, the Americans have made clear, or Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has made clear that the Americans are not going to be running Venezuela. They're just going to be supervising, and the actual running of the country is going to be in the hands of the same setup that was there before Maduro was taken. In other words, the interim president is the former vice president, and the entire structure of the Maduro government remains in force. And the secret police, the armed thugs that have roamed the streets, the enforcers of the regime, are all there still. And it's by no means clear what kind of changes are going to take place. But what we do know is that President Trump has made very clear that Delcy Rodriguez, the interim president, will be expected to obey American instructions. Otherwise, she won't last very long either. But there's been no suggestion at all that there's going to be regime change anytime soon in Venezuela. The idea is to keep continuity, keep stability, and avoid the possibility of a descent into chaos, which might be the case if there was an attempt to impose the opposition to the Maduro government, which actually won last year's elections, but was locked out by Maduro.
Colin Harding, pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much. Now, the White House says President Trump has been discussing a range of options to acquire Greenland, including the use of military. But the US House Speaker says he's not heard anyone talking about this. The announcement came hours after European leaders issued a statement supporting Denmark, which has been pushing back against the president's plans for the Arctic island. For more on this, I'm joined by Christian Prip, senior researcher at the Norwegian Fridtjof Nansen Institute. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. So Greenland is in the eye of an intense diplomatic storm as the White House ramps up its rhetoric. Does the US have a legitimate case to take control of Greenland?
No, it's the U.S. does not have a legitimate case to take over the Greenland. Greenland is under the authority of the Kingdom of Denmark, and the question of the Greenland of the autonomy of the kingdom and part of the kingdom is solely a matter for Denmark and Greenland to decide on.
And the White House says President Trump has discussed a range of options to acquire Greenland, including possible military action. But the US House Speaker Mike Johnson said he's actually not heard anyone talking about this at this stage. How confusing is this messaging coming out of the US right now?
I think it is quite confusing because at an earlier stage, President Trump did not rule out the option of using military force against Greenland. But I think these last days' messages from other people in the U.S., influential people in the U.S., is a relief that it seems like it seems more likely that there are no plans of taking military action against Greenland.
And I just want to bring you some breaking news that we're actually getting. The US Secretary of State, that's Marco Rubio, has said that he planned to meet next week with Denmark, which requested talks after President Trump's threats to Greenland. What do you make of this? Is it a surprise, or were you expecting them to meet for discussions?
I know that this was the wish of the Danish government and the Greenlandic government as to have this meeting with the Secretary of State Rubio. So, and I think, of course, any kind of better communication and better dialogue on this difficult matter between the governments of the kingdom and Greenland is, of course, a very good thing.
And the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Greenland and Denmark must determine the future of Greenland, just like you did say to me earlier, nobody else. Do you think that we can expect a showdown with Trump and Europe over the threat to Greenland? Because we've been hearing a lot about how this could shake NATO. Well,
State Secretary Rubio has also said in relation to Venezuela that President Trump is always very serious about what he says in doing something. So I think there would still be a pressure from President Trump to take over Greenland in some way or the other. That's my expectation. And if it's not, it seems now that it will not take place through invasion in that way, but there has been then talks about buying Greenland and some would say bribing Greenland to be part of the US, and that would also be unacceptable for the Kingdom of Denmark.
And according to opinion polls, a vast majority of people living in Greenland reject Trump's attempts to actually annex their land. Do people who live in Greenland actually have a say on what could happen?
Yes, they have a say. They have a say together with Denmark. Greenland has semi-autonomy, and they have a large degree of autonomy over their own issues within Greenland. But foreign policy is a matter for the whole kingdom, and therefore a matter also for the Danish government to be part on. So Greenland will not be able to take decisions on its own on this question about autonomy or not. That would be a matter for the kingdom as a whole.
Thank you so much for speaking to me, Christian Prip. A pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Australia is battling its hottest heat wave in 6 years. People have flocked to beaches and pools today to escape severe temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius. Chris Gilbert has more.
Leaping to relief. These Melbourne residents ignored official warnings to stay inside and hydrate, to cool off at the pools and beaches.
The heat is exhausting. It is like nearly unbearable, but Fitzroy Pools is making it okay.
Meteorologists say the heat is the worst since the Black Summer of 2019.
We're particularly wanting Victorians to make sure that they are being alert to their conditions. Make sure that you are staying in cool places, whether that's accessing a local library, a school, a leisure centre or air-conditioned buildings.
Outside of Melbourne, temperatures soared above 31 degrees Celsius in Sydney and Perth and hit 43 degrees in Adelaide. But the heat didn't deter revellers at the iconic Elvis Festival in the New South Wales town of Parkes. Committed fans and impersonators dressed in jumpsuits and lacquered wigs did their best to keep cool.
As much as we can, keep out of the sun, plenty of water, keep hydrated, a few beers, yeah. Just change the suits a couple times a day, probably. Yeah.
Extreme heat events have been becoming more common in Australia with devastating results. Bushfires in 2019 and 2020 killed 33 people and killed or displaced more than 1 billion animals. The country is bracing for another scorcher in the months to come as the Weather Bureau issues heat warnings and heightened fire risks. Chris Gilbert, Arabiya English.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The UN has accused Israel of imposing an apartheid system in the West Bank, saying decades of discrimination and segregation against Palestinians have worsened. The report highlights restricted access to land, resources and basic services, alongside escalating settler violence and unreasonable detentions. UN Rights Chief Volker Turk called on Israel to respect Palestinians' rights. Now, a Turkish man has been sentenced to 11 years for supplying boats and engines used by people smugglers in the English Channel. Admen Savez made millions from equipment linked to deadly crossings that killed dozens. Authorities say he was a key supplier for a Europe-wide smuggling network. Severe snow and icy conditions are disrupting travel across Europe, with at least 6 people reported dead. 5 deaths were recorded in France, while 1 woman was killed in Sarajevo after heavy snowfall. Hundreds of flights have been cancelled, leaving thousands stranded at airports in Paris and in Amsterdam. Aldrich Ames, the CIA officer who spied for the Soviet Union and Russia, has died at the age of 84. Ames, who was serving a life sentence without parole, sold secrets to the KGB for $2.5 million over 9 years, betraying more than 100 operations and causing the deaths of at least 10 US agents. Now, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has ordered security forces not to crack down on economic protest, drawing a distinction between peaceful demonstrators and armed rioters. In a video released, the Iranian news agency, after a cabinet meeting, the vice president said Pezeshkian had ordered that no security measures be taken against the demonstrators. Iran's military chief has also warned that Iran will not stand by and allow itself to be threatened by outside powers after the US and Israel backed anti-government protests. For more on this, I'm joined by Raghida Dergham, advisor on US and international affairs. Raghida, as always, great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for hosting me. Thank you.
Pleasure. Iran's president has told security forces not to target protesters. Why are we seeing a softening of the rhetoric and almost restraint coming from those in power in Tehran?
Because those in power are balancing on the edge. They would like to contain and to oppress the revolution, if you want to call it this, the counter-revolution. But they know they will have to use military means, and that tool of repression would be costly, as President Trump made clear. So therefore, they're trying to walk a tightrope between absorbing the shock that is caused by the demonstrators and making sure that they don't receive the other shock by a military operation by the United States and Israel. So therefore, Iran is in panic, the leadership is in panic, unless they realize they have to reform the regime, they are going to lose power in Iran. And therefore, the implosion that's taking place is serious.
Reports do suggest that at least 36 people have been killed during protests across Iran. Obviously, we've got no official figures from the country itself. But President Trump, as you did mention there, threatened intervention if Iranian security forces kill peaceful protests. And we spoke about that. But is the US likely to do anything in the near future?
I think President Trump is betting on the erosion from within. He will give that a little time, not too much time. The big mistake would be that the Iranian regime forces the army to intervene. If that happens, there is a very big chance of either a split within the ranks of the army in Iran, because the army does not want to use its tools against the demonstrators in the way that the regime wishes or hopes for. But on the other hand, it is not going to be let go by the regime, because it is a military regime after all. So I think it's a very serious warning that President Trump gave. He said, you oppress the demonstrators by force, you get treated forcibly by military operation by Israel and the United States. I think this is serious. Do not think that Donald Trump is bluffing. Procrastination is no longer an affordable asset for Iran. What it's called the strategic patience has waned out, and now it's time to face reality. Either that they reform, or because of what's happening within Iran and but with the proxies, the regime is going to kill itself. The survival of the regime is only possible by the reform of the doctrine, and that includes the nuclear, the missiles and the proxies. If they're not willing to do that in Tehran, I think a very bad surprise is awaiting them.
And what do you think could happen next? As you said, it seems like the regime in Iran is procrastinating. But what can you expect if these protests do carry on? We're in the 11th day. There are threats by the US. And it doesn't appear like reform is on the cards at the moment. Or could I possibly be wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I don't think it's on the horizon now. They are worried. They are very worried. They're scared. As I said, they're in panic because they saw what happened in Venezuela and faster than they expected. I think if there is going to be a timeline or a time space, a time grace given by the Trump administration to Iran, it will be till maybe Nowruz, which is the beginning of spring, the 21st beginning of spring in Iran, the 21st of March. That is only if the Iranian authorities do not crack down in a very bloody way. If they are willing to enter negotiations, to give something on the nuclear, and to understand that they have no more proxies that they can use in a very effective way. Look at what's happening in Lebanon with Hezbollah. Look at how they lost their access in Syria. I think the Houthis right now are lying low in Yemen because the Iranians know it's not the time to do a bravado there. And so if the proxies are weakened, again, erosion of the proxies as well, and an implosion within the country. So I think, the Iranians will have, the Iranian regime, that is to say, they have to read between the lines of what the Iranian people are saying as well. Because right now, the slogans are not only about bread, the slogans are not only about the hijab, they are about the return of the Shah. And that frightens the regime in Tehran. So they have to be quick in figuring out what options they have. How are they going to manage to stay in power? Is it by accommodation or is it by confrontation? It's a big question that we all await the answer for.
Yeah, Raghida, you're absolutely right. Time will tell. But I want to move on to another story that's been happening, and you actually mentioned Yemen to me. And the Saudi-led coalition has carried out strikes on Yemen today. What is the latest on this situation?
I think the Saudis are very keen on making sure to help Yemen to be united, to regain its normality, if you will. It has been an abnormal country for quite a long time. Now there are, of course, we all know that there are differences in the approach to Yemen between two very close allies, the Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. It's two different approaches, but I don't think it's going to lead to a confrontation between these two countries. The Houthis are still the common denominator in both countries' assessment of what is dangerous for Yemen and what has caused Yemen to almost collapse or to collapse in the way it did, and that is the Houthis. And who are the supporters of the Houthis? Back again to Iran. Iran is now claiming that it wants the unity, it wants a peaceful Yemen, but I think it knows that it acts, not only knows, in the way that the Houthis are Iran's strategic tool, and that is why it's lying low until this sorts itself out, but the issue is not over. The danger is still the Houthis in Yemen. So I think there is danger. I don't think it's a simple walk in the park, what's going on. To the contrary, it's very dangerous. But I believe that the Saudis and the Emiratis will see eye to eye eventually on how to work together in this in resolving this conflict. But I think Iran is preparing probably either to use the Houthis to disrupt later or to use them as part of the bargaining in order to survive.
Raghida, Dergham, as always, it's brilliant to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Lego is launching new high-tech smart bricks, which will bring its classic toys to life with light, sound and movement. Lego plans to launch its debut tech product in March by rolling out a new Star Wars set. Play experts warn that innovation could hinder children's imagination, while Lego CEO said the smart toys were part of their plan to integrate digital technology. German chemical giant Bayer is suing US pharmaceutical firms Pfizer, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, as well as Germany's BioNTech for allegedly breaking a patent to make COVID jabs. News agency AFP are reporting that the American companies used a licensed mRNA sequence developed in the 1980s by a subsidiary of Bayer. Turning to all the sports news now, when England lost 5 wickets in the final season of Day 4 of the Ashes Tour in Sydney. That's in Australia, of course. However, English batter Jacob Bethel added a glimpse of hope, scoring his first maiden Test century. Meanwhile, team captain Ben Stokes did suffer a groin injury. And the Brazilian forward Neymar has extended his contract with Santos until the end of 2026 as he seeks to earn a World Cup call-up. The 33-year-old has not represented his home country since 2023 due to a ruptured ligament. This comes as Brazil prepares to face Scotland, Morocco and Haiti in the Group C at the World Cup, which is kicking off in June. A reminder of our top stories. The US has seized an oil tanker with links to Russia and Venezuela as Pete Hegseth says a blockade on sanctioned and illicit Venezuelan oil remains in full effect anywhere in the world. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he's meeting with Denmark and Greenland, and that will be next week. And Iran's president has ordered security forces not to crack down on economic protests, distinguishing peaceful demonstrators from armed rioters. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. We'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.